All right, hello. So in this video, I'm going to talk about how we can loop through the elements of a dictionary. So effectively how we can combine dictionaries and loops together in Python. So again, this is probably going to repeat a bunch of examples from the course text, but I want to sort of show it in action. All right, so we're going to start off with, we've got our ages dictionary from the previous video. So our dictionary has 6 keys in it. We've got Sarah, Amit, Zong, Fred, John, Jane. Each then have their own age. So I can then print out their ages and we see what we get. So because dictionaries are a sequence, similar to lists or strings or files or tuples, that means they're iterable. We can actually loop through them by using a for loop, just like we would with a list. So we can write that example. So for example, I could say for each age in my ages dictionary, and I can then say, let's print out the age and see what we get. So I would then say loop through all those elements in the dictionary and print out each one and see what we get. If we do so, what you'll notice is that we are not actually printing out the ages, right? We're not printing out the 42, the 35, the 13, 23, 66, 66. We're printing out the names, the keys. So really more appropriately, this would be for each key in the ages, right? We're printing out each key. Or if we want to be even more generic about it, we might say for each name in the ages, and we're going to print out each name. So again, that by default, this is going to loop through the keys of our dictionary. So this works out pretty okay if you want to be able to get through a dictionary. It means that we're not going through the values, but we're going through the actual keys. So that works out all right. We can say for each name in our ages, I can then print out the name, and I can say is, and then I can say go to that dictionary and access that particular name. So we can say for the first time through the round, the first time through this loop, the name is Sarah. So I can then say go get the Sarah key of my ages, years old. So if I can do that kind of work, I'm still able to access the value because I have the key, so I'm able to go, so basically I'm getting a list of the room names, and then I can then go to each individual room to print out the thing that I care about. It's similar to how, when we use something like a range in a list, in order to be able to say loop through the indices, I'm looping through not the indices, but I'm looping through the keys. So I can then see how old every person happens to be. So this works okay. This works great. That said, this is the most basic loop for working with a dictionary. That said, dictionaries do provide a couple of helpful methods that actually make it, in some ways, easier or cleaner, or at least more explicit about how we want to iterate through those dictionaries. So in particular, a dictionary provides a function, a method called keys, which you would call on the dictionary, and then use a dot notation, and then you type the function name keys. If I do that work, then this will produce an iterable, basically produces a sequence of all of the keys of my dictionary. So I could say, look at my ages.keys, and that'll tell me that I'm getting now a dict keys, right? That's the kind of sequence this is. It's not a list, it's not a range, it's this dict keys kind of sequence. And that contains these particular sets of values inside of there. If I want to treat this as a list, because I want to work with it, I could convert it into a list by using the same kind of conversion that we've normally done. Right, ages.keys, and that gives me now my list of keys. Because ages.keys is a sequence that I can iterate through, I can actually put that inside my for loop. So I could take my for loop down here, right, where I was looping through all the keys, and instead of talking about going through all the ages and having sort of this implicit loop through the keys, I could actually say, let's go access that keys sequence, right, that has my list of those keys in a particular order. And then we can say, let's now loop through those particular values. So this is what Python's doing underneath the hood, but we can basically do the exact same kind of work, saying let's go through each name in my keys and then print out that name and access the value to figure out how old they are. And if we do this work, then once again, we get my list of ages so we know how old everybody is. I'm going to note that I tend to really like using the keys function as opposed to trying to iterate through it sort of implicitly. I find that this is a little bit more clear about what I'm doing. This is reminding me that, oh, I'm iterating through the keys, I'm not going through the values. It's a little bit more to type, technically maybe it's a little bit more to type, but I find it easier and clearer and to read and to understand, so I sort of recommend you do it. I also want to make sure to note that with either of these structures, right, when I'm accessing these keys, there's no enforced ordering to these keys, right? So it's giving me in the order in which I type them in because Python's being nice, but there's nothing that enforces that. I might get a different order if I run this on a different computer, if I run it in a different version of Jupyter. There's lots of ways that that ordering could change. So there's nothing that I can't assume that Sarah is always going to come before Amit, or that John is always going to come before Jane. This kind of actually, the fact that these sequences may seem like they're always going to be in the same order because they sort of look that way, but that's not enforced, is actually something you have to be you want to be really careful about. You want to make sure you always remember that dictionaries are not sorted. This was actually a major issue about a couple weeks ago, where it turns out that some scientific researchers had an algorithm that was basically going through and looping through effectively a dictionary, actually a list of files, but effectively this kind of thing, and they assumed that there was always going to be in the same order, but it turns out that on different operating systems they're not, so that when other people tried to replicate their work, the whole thing fell apart because it turns out that the ordering of these values weren't the same. So again, this can screw up people all over the place. Be careful that you don't become one of them, right? So remember that dictionaries are not ordered. All right, great. So we can loop through all of the keys, and that works fine. Similar to the keys method, there's also an equivalent values method that's going to give me a sequence of all the values. So if I talk about ages.values, this is going to give me a dict values sequence. So again, it's not a list, it's a dict values sequence, but that's going to then give me all of the ages, all the numbers instead. So I can then use that to loop through all the values without looping through all the keys. I might say for each age in my ages values. Now remember, I'm not going through the names, I'm going through the numbers, I'm going through the ages themselves. And I can print out the age. And that gives me all my numbers. Note that from here, I can't figure out what key that was associated with, right? I can't figure out that there's no way sort of in this loop to figure out, well, who was 42, who was 35, who was 66. I can't reverse look that up. Dictionaries go key to value. There's no way to go value to key. Because again, if I have the 66, it's like, well, which one is John and which one is Jane? There's no ordering implied in force, so I don't know which is which. So I would at most be able to say that someone is this age years old. That's about as far as I can possibly get. Oh, sorry, extra space there. Great, so we can loop through all the keys, we can loop through all the values. Looping through values is not very common. It doesn't happen a lot. There's very little practical reason to do that, unless occasionally you want to just like grab all the values because you just care about the numbers, you don't actually care about what the key is associated with them. It really means that you wanted a list in the first place instead of a dictionary. All right, so there's one more way that we can then loop through these kinds of dictionaries, and this tends to be actually the most useful and the most common way of doing this. So in addition to getting the keys and the values, I can also access what are called the items. Now, the items method is going to return a sequence of tuples. It's going to return a sequence of key value pairs. So if I execute this thing, what I'm getting is I'm now getting a dict items sequence. So again, it's not a list. It's a dict item sequence, so it's not, you can't assign to it, you can't quite use it in the same way, but it's iterable, it works in that kind of respect. Where what it's actually doing is producing me a list of values. There are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 values in here, each of which is a tuple, where the first element of that tuple is the key, and the second element of that tuple is the value, right? So the first one is the first is the name, and the second one is the age. So what I can then do is I can say, great, let's go for each item in my ages.item. Here you go, I'm gonna leave that there because that's my structure. So for each item in my ages.items, right, I could do this kind of work. I can then print out those items to see what they all look like. And then there's my list of tuples, right? So I've got Sarah is 42, Amit is 35, Zong is 13, etc. Because I have that kind of work, what I might be able to do is I could then do something like I could print out that item not, right? So the first element of item is going to be the name. So that's going to be item not is going to be the name. Is item 1 is going to be the age, years old. So there's my, here, let's get rid of this. Stop bringing up the item, right? So then I get all my list of how old everybody is. Because again, what I'm doing is I'm going through each item. Because each item is a tuple, I can then access the key as the 0th element of the tuple and the value as the first element of the tuple. So really what I'm doing is I can say key is going to be equal to item 0 and value is going to be equal to item 1. And then I'm printing out the key is the value years old, right? This is my structure that I'm working with. Oop, sorry, value singular. Okay, so the place that then the way that we can then clean this up, the way we can add a little bit more magic to this, is because these things are tuples, we can actually apply multiple assignment to this. So remember that what I can do is if I have an item that is a tuple, like Amit is 35, I can then take that tuple and unpack it into multiple variables, right? I could then say, let's take my name and my age should be equal to whatever this item might be. And remember, if I take a tuple and try to assign it to multiple variables, then the first value of the tuple gets assigned to the first variable, and the second value gets assigned to the second variable. So I can do this kind of work, and then if I ask what name, if I just say try to print out name, actually let me do it in the previous cell. If I try to print out name and age, then I get my emit and my 35. So really what it means is that I am having these two assignments here, key and value, but it really means I can actually combine those together by using this multiple assignment unpacking process. So I can actually say, let's have my key and my value be equal to this particular item, right? Just like I did down here, right? My name and age is equal to item. At this point, I'm going to say my key and value is equal to item. So the first element of item will get assigned to key, and the second value of item will get assigned to value. Seem okay so far? Good. So this is going to then produce the exact same result. The trick here is that I've got this step right here where I'm saying take that item and assign it to key and value, and that's cleaning up my code a little bit. But what we can actually do is that in Python is that because item is this thing, if I want to take that item and immediately assign it to my key value pair, I can actually do so. So I can actually copy this thing and replace item here with these two variables that I want to assign that tuple to. Effectively, I'm taking this line right here and I'm removing it, I'm commenting it out, and replacing it and making that implicitly part of my for loop. So what the for loop will do is it'll go into ages.items, it'll take that first item, that first tuple, and it'll assign that tuple to these two variables. So instead of assigning it to one variable, one item variable, it'll take that value, that tuple, and assign it to the first element to key and the second element to value. So that I can sort of run through this and say that and be able to do this exact same work. So it's going to produce the exact same results. But the way that allows me now read and understand and talk about this loop is I now can read it as for each key and value in my items, right? So you think of that comma almost like an and, for each key and value in my items. The same way up here we said for each age in my values or for each name in my keys, I can now say for each key and value in my items. We can clean this up more by giving these things, again, better variable names, and that's often what I recommend doing. So instead of talking about for each, here, I'll do it one more step just so you can see all the pieces. So if we're talking, instead of talking about the key and the value, which are sort of these generic, like, types of things that we're working with, we can, and they're just variable names, so we can name them whatever we want. So I might say, well, what is the key? Well, the key is going to be a name. What is the value? Well, the value is going to be an age. So then I can replace key with name and value with age. So that now I'm getting my loop that says that for each name and age in my ages and dot items, right? So again, the key is going to be the name, the value is going to be the age. Print out the name is age years old, right? And we get that running, and look, we now have code that, like, it's almost human readable, right? For name and age in ages and items, it's getting close there. It's not quite the same thing. But this is basically going to be done. This will let us do that multiple assignment implicitly, and we have to understand tuples in order to figure out how this all works. And this is going to be the most common and most clean way of iterating through a dictionary. This tends to work a little bit better than doing something like this, or even something like this up here, because rather than having to access it using bracket notation, you're just going to basically get that value for free, so you don't have to go digging into where it is. Sometimes you might want to do this if you want to be able to, like, adjust that value in different ways, that key in different ways, but generally this will get you to let you do the exact same thing in a slightly cleaner way. Good. Really important point to remember, you have to call the .items method on top of this. If you don't do that, then you're going to end up getting an error where you're getting a single value, a single key, right, the name, and you're trying to take that name Sarah and assign it to both name and age. That's not going to work. So you got to remember to do items. We don't need to convert this into a list. You don't need to convert it into, you don't need to do any other work with it. You just need to be able to call that directly. Don't try to put parentheses around this. That works, but it's sort of considered less clean. We end up not doing it. So the key here is, again, to think through for each key and value in my items, print out those particular values. Great. So that's the basics of looping through dictionaries. Again, the important point to think about as you're doing loops and dictionaries is to think about what you're looping through. Am I trying to go through all the keys, right? Do I care about all of the names of my dictionary, right? All those keys, all those labels for things. Do I care about all the values? Am I trying to loop through all the different numbers here without caring about the keys? Or am I trying to think through each key value pair? And most commonly, you're going to want to do the latter, think through each key value pair, in which case we're going to end up using this items method and do a multiple assignment operation sort of implicitly in here in order to be able to say loop through each key and value in my key value pairs.